Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the European Union breakout session for the International Policy Workshop. My name's James Collis, and I'm going to be taking you through the first part of the agenda. Here is the team that we have working today. Some will be presenting, and others will be answering any questions that you pose in the chat as the sessions run. So whilst you're all muted, if you do have questions, you can still get them resolved whilst we run through the session that we have planned for you. It's quite typical that you see a number of different nationalities in our team. This reflects exactly how we work as a group across Europe, both in lobbying and in our other actions. The learning objectives for today are firstly to give you a sense of the institutional context for climate policy that exists within Europe and the European Union. Secondly, that you will get a sense of the pros and cons of current European climate legislation. And finally, that you will be able to describe at least the scope and ambition elements of the European Green Deal. The agenda we're going to work through for this afternoon is, first of all, I'm going to give you a brief introduction to Europe, and then we're going to have a short question and answer or poll session, just so that we can get a sense of what people's opinions are. It's not too onerous, but also we get you involved in some of the questions that we think about. Then we're going to look at an overview of some of the work that's been going on in Europe over the last year. And then Wolfram is going to talk through current EU policy, and Alex is going to give an overview of the European Green Deal. And as we wrap up, we're going to look at what our poll options answers are for responding to the question that Ross has set up in the main session. And then there's going to be a block of time, hopefully about 15 minutes, for you to have some discussion amongst yourselves about the question and the possible answers. And then we'll come back together for a final 10 minutes or so to look at the reasoning behind those results. So, brief history of the European Union in time. Wave one were the countries in yellow that originally formed the European Union, and then the orange colours joined the European Union subsequently. The other colours represent different agreements around Europe, and I'd ask you just to have a quick look at the green ones, particularly, for instance, Switzerland in the middle, which is completely landlocked, and the UK, which you will see in the clear as mud colour. This is a slightly different perspective of Europe based on international agreements that are in place. So I'm just going to work through these different coloured lines to give you a sense of it. From the bottom, the yellow line is the Schengen area, and that means that people, citizens, can move without needing passports between those different countries. The pink line is the customs union, which means goods can circulate without duties. The blue line, which is the block to the right-hand side of the screen, has the European Free Trade Association, which means there can be trade between those different countries and the other EU country members. The grey line is the European Economic Area, which is a slightly different set of countries, and that allows for free movement of people in exchange for a payment into the European Union. The green line is the Eurozone. Countries in the green bubble operate purely with the euro as their currency and have surrendered their historic national currencies. Obviously, the countries outside of the green area have retained their national currencies. And the purple line, the European Union, is the line that we are predominantly going to talk about today, which is the 28 or 27 soon to be nations single market of free trade and shared regulation. So I'm going to move on just to talk about the European Union structure now, but it's just useful to know that these other agreements are in place, and occasionally people confuse them. And what I'd briefly like you to do is look at where Switzerland is now on the right-hand side, which is landlocked, but outside some of the trading areas. So they operate customs borders at every border for all goods. And if you look at the left-hand side, you'll see the United Kingdom, and it does make you wonder about the question and meaning behind the Brexit question of leave versus remain, given all the different agreements in place. So this is the European Union, and we're going to look at the main institutions of the European Union. At the top is the directorate covering budget, climate, economy, and 50 other areas. And this is effectively the executive branch of the European Union. Down to the bottom left, we have the Parliament with over 700 MEPs from 26 countries, roughly by proportion, and these are elected representatives. In the bottom right, we have the existing representatives of each national government. So this will be headed by the Prime Minister of each national government, with other representatives from the other key areas of government. And these are commonly referred to as the member states. And these are the three main organs of the European Union. So now we're going to move to our questions, and I understand all three questions have been put on the same poll. So in order to explain these questions, effectively what we've done is we've asked for each of the three main elements of carbon fee and dividend. So the carbon price is the first question, and it's the question is which element of the European Union can decide on policy in this area. So for instance, on the carbon pricing question, can it be A, the European Union, B, only the member states, i.e. the countries, or can it be both, establishing a price? And then on the next question, it's the same three answers, but the question is who can decide about a dividend? Who can pay citizens a dividend out of those three groups? And the final question then is who can establish a border carbon adjustment? So I'll give you a moment to can everybody now see the poll, Brandon?
Yes, they should see it now.
Okay. So I'm going to give you some time to start filling that in. I apologize for giving all three questions at once. Our intention was they would come separately, but okay, results seem fairly stable. There might be one or two of you still thinking about it. Let's quickly go through the answers. So can everybody see the poll here?
I think everyone can see the poll in a separate box.
Okay. So the answer to the first question, it's impressive, is both A and B, as in many member states already have taxes on fuels and other greenhouse gas emissions, and the EU also has its own pricing mechanisms in addition to the energy trading system. So the correct answer is both A and B. So congratulations on that. On the second question, again, yeah, the majority have the correct answer, which is answer B, only member states. The EU has neither the right nor the ability to make payments to citizens. And on the third question, we have this one predominantly right as well, which is member states do not have the right to establish border mechanisms. Only the EU can do this. And this is to do with free movement of goods, services, capital, and people. So thank you for participating in that. That was fun. Sorry we confronted you with all three questions together. So let's move on. So I'm going to give you a brief introduction to Citizens Climate Europe now. So the first thing you'll see on this map is there are less pins than in the United States. These chapters are primarily focused on the member states, on their national governments, and the EU Action Team is made up of members from these chapters who are also willing to work at the European level. If we look at the Parliament, the elected aspect of the European Union, there are 8 major party groups from 26 countries. This is the November Scouting Party, which was our first experimental lobbying in the European Union. And this is the group from the February training session in Brussels. Clearly, CCL Europe is not yet filling the steps to Capitol Hill. So one of the realities for us is that the lack of numbers in CCL Europe means we have to be very selective about who we meet. So we research politicians to identify who are active on climate and influential, and we spend our time to go and meet with them as much as we can. So when we break down the results of those meetings, down the left-hand side, you can see the different party groups that we've met with and the number of legislators' officers that we've met with. And then spread across to the right are the key committees that we're focused on. So the first two, the Environment and the Trade Committee, are the two major committees currently looking for ownership of the European Green Deal files, which means they would get to do most of the work. Consequently, most of our work is in those areas. This is a simple count of lobby sessions, so you can see the impact for us of traveling to Brussels in November and in February. So physical presence meetings were great. And then from March onwards, what we have is a gradual transition to online lobby meetings. This is a chart from CAN Europe based on their experience that highlights the level of influence on policy over time. So that's the graph at the top. And at the bottom, what you have is a chart showing the formal legislative process that the European Union goes through. And the big green arrow that I've now drawn at the top is the November to February time period. So we're very excited to be engaged when it was very, very rich for engagement. And although you can't read it, but down at the bottom, this red circled first step is the public consultation process, which is what we're now beginning to see in Europe. So in the last 2 months, the European team has written policy responses to the border carbon adjustment and to the climate law. There were over 300 responses to the border carbon adjustment element, and within 2 weeks, we had managed to set up an online meeting with the executive, and that led directly to the third item on the list there, the policy briefing covering the Energy Tax Directive and a couple of other legislative areas. So broadly, what we're looking to do here is we're looking to focus where we get the biggest payback and see if we can punch above our weight for CCL. The last item on the list we'll come back to at the end of the presentation. That's ongoing at the moment, and you may be able to help with that. So I'm now going to hand over to Wolfram, who is going to take you through current EU climate policy.
Thank you very much, James. Yes, I'm going to tell you about a selection of the current EU climate policy. And that is especially important for us at Citizens Climate Europe, because when we lobby for carbon fee and dividend, we have to keep in mind the existing policies and see how what we propose can fit into the existing frameworks. So this is a list of 7 keywords here, and no worries, I won't talk about all 7 of them. Go through this list briefly and then talk about 2 of them in more detail. So the first one is an energy tax directive. That was not set out to be a climate policy, but it sets a minimum tax on fuels. The second one is the emission trading scheme, which I'll tell you about more in the next slide. The third one, the Renewable Energy Directive, I guess is pretty self-explanatory, sets out the goals for renewable energy. The fourth one is the effort sharing regulation, which probably doesn't tell you much. It certainly didn't tell me much, the name, until more recently, and I'm going to introduce you to this in a second as well. The Energy Efficiency Directive, I guess is self-explanatory again, and then we have 27 member states at the moment, so there are 27 national energy and climate plans. And last but not least, there are national or member state actions. So individual member states also have their own climate policy. So I'm telling you more about the emission trading scheme, short, the ETS, and the effort sharing regulation. Okay. The ETS is not what CCL policy sets out to do. It's not a price on carbon upstream, but it's a cap and trade system. Some of you or most of you might have heard of that, but I'm going through that in some detail again. So on the left, you see the cap, the cap of the amount of emissions the European Union sets in a certain sectors. I'm going to talk about what these sectors are in a second. And there's a continuous decline of these emissions over time. And how is this achieved? This is achieved by auctioning and trading the right to pollute. So there's a finite number of rights to pollute, a finite number of certificates for ton of CO2 or CO2 equivalents. And they are auctioned in a big pool, and then they can be traded between polluters. So this little example we have here, company A has more permits than it needs. Company B has less permits than it needs, but they need to hand in these permits to fit the regulation. So company A can sell the permit to company B, and company buys it from company A respectively. This is why this is called a cap and trade system. So the ETS covers about half of all emissions in the European Union, and it applies to mostly stationary installation. So think about heat and power generation, industrial applications. This is not an upstream carbon pricing as we would like at CCL, but it is a downstream carbon pricing. So a power plant is associated with a certain amount of emissions and has to hand in certificates corresponding to these emissions. It's not the fuel the power plant takes in that are priced. There's, in all carbon pricing schemes, there's the worry of carbon leakage. And this is addressed by in two ways within the ETS: free allocation and state aid. Focus on free allocation. So I told you that these right to pollute have to be bought, auctioned in auctions or in a secondary market, but certain industries get free certificates to protect them from that increasing price and to reduce the risk of carbon leakage of the industry moving outside of the ETS area. On the right, you see the price for emission certificates. The ETS went through different phases, so we can ignore the first part, focus on the second part. The price has been very low over the last number of years, and it's only started to rise quite significantly over the last 2 years or so. There was a pronounced dip due to the COVID-19 pandemic, but it has since recovered again a little bit, and it's now over 20 euros when I checked a few days ago. So I told you the ETS covers about half of all emissions, unlike big industry and power generation installations. The other part is covered by the effort sharing regulation. And the effort sharing regulation sets targets for greenhouse gas emissions that are not subject to the ETS, as I just said. And the idea is to have a 30% reduction in 2030 compared to 2005. Compare this to the ETS, which aims for a 43% reduction in the same time frame. Maybe quite surprisingly, the 30% reduction does not apply to all member states in the same way. So in the little table, I've given you a small selection of the 27 member states and what their national goals are. So Germany is one among the highest, not the highest, but among the highest, and aims for 38% reduction. Poland committed to a 7% reduction, while Bulgaria's aim is to stay flat until 2030 compared to 2005. Next. So it's not how I thought before I joined the CCL that we can do whatever we want and in 2030 we have to reach this goal. No. So this goal translates into annual emission allocations for a given member state for a given year. So there's a path towards these 2030 goals. There are provisions to provide some flexibility in how to reach this goal, but that's too much of detail for the talk today. Next. So these are the current climate policies of the EU. And I presented to you the two most important ones. And as I mentioned, as CCL EU, we have to work in this existing framework to convince politicians of carbon fee and dividend and border carbon adjustment. And to make it more confusing and also to make it more exciting, there's a lot of change currently around these climate policies. And Alexandros will tell you more about this now.
Thank you, Wolfram. Dear listeners, my name is Alexandros, and I'm a law student at UC Berkeley. My function at CCL is to produce a paper describing EU's climate actions to American and European audiences. So I will try and do just that and summarize the Green Deal. Now, it's not a coincidence that the initiative is inspired by President Roosevelt's New Deal because in the wake of the Great Depression, because by addressing climate change, the Green Deal, like the New Deal, also proposes a major transformation of the economy. Naturally, it affects nearly everyone involved in this economy. And a key point of this proposal is that no one of those affected is left behind. But thankfully, the plan begins by voting in a climate law. Now, I never thought I'd say this, but I absolutely cannot wait to have a long and detailed codified piece of legislation to go through because this climate law is objective-oriented and legally binding. It sets a minimum of 50% emission reductions by 2030 and total climate neutrality by 2050. These two objectives are important because the major overhaul of the European economy is designed with those two objectives in mind. And we will see together how this transformation will look like. So new policies, we can move to the next slide. New policies will be introduced to help reach these goals. Existing policies, like those Wolfram mentioned and described us, and mechanisms will be adjusted to meet these objectives. In the process, some mechanisms may be expanded, amended, merged, or supplemented with new tools to help them readjust. I think that specifically the cap and trade system, the European ETS, maybe will suffer all four of those changes. Now, while this transformation is happening, at the same time, the EU will do these four things. It will support the parties most affected through the Just Transition mechanism, which, unless it starts raining money, we expect disbursement of funds to go through the European Investment Bank and the European Regional Development Bank. Secondly, it will protect the ecosystems and biodiversity in the European continent. Thirdly, it will direct resources to research, clean tech, and modernization of infrastructure. And lastly, it will pursue ambitious agreements, well, hopefully ambitious, with its Atlantic partners and the world. Now let's discuss some selected climate initiatives, because there are too many of them to talk about each one. As Wolfram mentioned, an existing policy is the European cap and trade system. Now, initially, the cap and trade system will be readjusted to pick up the pace needed to meet the two objectives by 2030 and 2050, and perhaps extended to cover new sectors. Additionally, we're also evaluating the introduction of border and carbon adjustment. And well, this could be a new policy, but in my mind, it is unlikely that it will function separately. It seems more reasonable at this point, at least, that it will be a supplementary tool for the cap and trade system, which in the process of bringing up the pace might induce significant carbon leakage. Now, one possible design that has already been laid in a French paper in 2009 called for WTO compatibility. It also described the BCA being attached to the cap and trade system through the carbon inclusion mechanism, which means that if there's a company outside the EU, it can also participate in the European cap and trade system. And the calculating of the direct emissions and the calculating of the fee that the company would pay would be from direct emissions from the product's production. So I think a relevant term in the US is just a carbon footprint. Now, essentially, what would happen is that the importer or the exporter would be required to pay the same fee as if the product was produced in the EU, where the necessary allowances would have to be purchased in advance. But at this point, that's just speculation. We're not sure how the BCA will be implemented. I need to say this. Another new policy is called the circular economy. Now, the Circular Economy Action Plan will include a sustainable products policy to support the circular design of all products based on common methodology and principles. The focus will be on resource-intensive sectors such as textiles, construction, electronics, and plastics, and it will include measures to encourage businesses to offer and consumers to choose reusable, durable, and repairable products. I think that one high resemblance with the US policy is the Buy Clean California Act, which addresses mostly construction materials, but is very much following the same pattern. Now, the last policy I'll describe, and I promise it's my last, is from farm to fork, and it incorporates the principles of the circular economy I just talked about into the agricultural sector. It shifts the farmers' concerns from compliance to performance, and their plans should lead to the use of sustainable practices like precision agriculture, organic farming, agroecology, agroforestry, and stricter animal welfare standards as well. Now, ideally, we would hope that allows to reduce the use and risk of chemical pesticides, fertilizers, antibiotics, and food waste. Now, to sum up, the common market is a free market, right? And putting quotas on banks' investment portfolios and pressing member states to pass green laws are promising strategies, but the consumer makes the final decision. And thankfully, we're in a place right now where the market has been widely responsive and consumers are increasingly engaged and, for the most part, quite aware. And also, to further facilitate and promote such behavior, the Climate Pact campaign and communication strategy will be launched by the Commission. And that is 7-minute mark. And as I just approached, I ask James to carry on with our final poll exercise. Thank you very much.
Immaculate timing, Alex. Okay, thank you. So that concludes the information we have to share with you at this point. And so the next step really is to look at the specific question that Ross has set up So in terms of responding to Ross in his new role as the US Secretary of State, as they request to open negotiations, we need to decide as a group what is our best diplomatic strategy. So we have a poll for you on this. And so the idea is we have this poll, and then we're going to spend 15 minutes discussing it and then come back together and share what we've learned. So the basic question is, as the climate diplomat for the European Union, which of the 4 climate diplomacy strategies do you prefer? And so we've outlined 4 options here. The first is that the border carbon adjustment from the States is suspended on the basis that EU mitigation currently meets or exceeds current US mitigation. The second strategy would be to negotiate a bilateral treaty that forms a EU-US carbon club and effectively suspends both border carbon adjustments. The third option is to link the European ETS with the Californian and Quebec cap and trade systems, as they're currently already linked, via the pre-established defined requirements for integrating other international cap and trade options. And the final option is that the EU continues the discussions and negotiations with China, which are already underway, and offers to engage with the US either after or during the EU-China negotiations that are underway. So those are the 4 options that you have, and I think Brandon has a poll now so that we can actually set that up and you can vote. Excellent. So everybody can see those results. So now we're going to, in a moment, we're going to press a button and you're automatically going to land in a breakout room where you will have 12 minutes or so to discuss this. And what we want you to do is initially introduce yourselves to each other member in the group very briefly. Secondly, to say what your first option was and why. And once everybody has had the chance to do those 2 things, then you can discuss amongst yourselves, and we'll review the results when we come back together.
And I'm basically leading the meta discussion of the discussion you just had. Brendan, how many breakout rooms did we have?
We had 4 rooms.
Okay. So I suggest you have a representative from each room talk about what their thoughts were. So yeah, I'll start out with the room I was in, so the other ones who can decide who wants to go forward. From the room I was in, Gwen said she would summarize our discussion. Gwen, your turn.
Okay, sorry, I'm unmuted. Okay, so yeah, in our room, we didn't really talk about option number 1 because that seems like it maybe would not move us forward. We all liked number 2 because we felt like the European Union and the US face a lot of the same challenges and have a lot of similarities. So we thought a bilateral treaty there would be helpful. And also because that seemed like the option that would move the United States along the most. And the downside of that option would be that we don't know that as a European Union representative, we don't know if we can really trust the United States. And then for the third option, we talked about for that option, we might want to include the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative along with California and Quebec, because that would include a larger fraction of the United States, and that initiative is also a successful cap and trade endeavor. And then for number 4, we felt like it's very important to have sort of a friendly competition between China, EU, and America, everybody trying to lower their emissions the most. And so we figured that the discussion with China should probably continue no matter what, and it would be fruitful. So that's our summary.
Okay, thank you very much. I don't know names, so can maybe somebody in the chat say they want to talk for one of the other rooms, and then Brendan can unmute them.
Thank you. We just decided that all four merit attention because it would be moving in a direction of doing something when right now we're doing nothing. And so there were probably one is better than another, but it's most important that we begin to get in motion.
Okay, so so the question we'll need to report back to Ross Astoria in a second is that HR 763 has already passed. So in that light, which one would you prefer?
I don't think we addressed that in that way.
All right, no worries at all. Any other volunteers from the two other breakout rooms?
We can have Michael or Monica or Mary talk about what we discussed in our chat. If any one of you wants, you can raise your hand in the chat and we'll give you the mic. Thank you.
Okay. We primarily talked about 2 and 3. With, you know, my sense was that since California and Quebec had been able to work something out, that that might be an easy route to follow, but it was suggested that California cannot might not be able to negotiate in this situation. So I think we focused on number 2 to negotiate a bilateral treaty. It seemed to be more popular between the 3 of us.
So from the EU perspective, why would you prefer 2 over 1? Sorry for putting you on the spot. If you don't want to answer, that's totally fine.
I'm not sure I have enough information to be able to determine that, to give you something sensible. I'd love to hear other ideas.
Thank you, Michael.
Brandon, can you please unmute Ellen? Good.
I think I'm unmuted. Yes, I mean, I've hesitated because I'm afraid what's freshest in my mind is just my own opinion, which doesn't seem too fair to the group.
That is fine. Go ahead.
There were 3 of us who made substantive contributions to that, and we had all chosen item 2 or option 2. I think the interesting conversation was a point raised by Klaus, who felt that what we're not seeing in these options is a science-based approach to designing the interventions that would be absolutely the most effective. And so we could get lost in treaties and all kinds of agreements, but if we don't really focus on the critical entry points to shifting this curve of emissions, we're not doing the most effective thing. So I thought that was a really good point. Something that should be included, I think, that perspective in whatever agreement the EU and the US might be able to come to after HR 763 is passed.
Okay, thank you very much. So maybe I could summarize what I heard from the poll, what I heard in the group I was in, what I heard from you all now. So, and please raise your hand if you think you have something to add or you disagree. So the most popular option seemed to be number 2, that is negotiate a bilateral treaty between the EU and the US for a carbon club. That was, and I heard two reasons to do it. Or I heard that this might be a way to get us forward most. So what I heard from a number of people, that we don't see this as a treaty in itself, to have a treaty and to talk about specific amount of taxes, but I heard from the group that we all wanted to move it forward to our to mitigate climate change. And then what I heard from Helen was that she would like to see this not only a political or a technical exercise, but would like to have this revisited with science-based decisions. Did I miss anything substantial before we return to Ross?
That sounded pretty good, Wolfram. That sounded like a good summary to me. So I'm going to ask Brandon to put the link for rejoining Ross's section in the chat in a moment, but don't go just yet. I have one last ask for our international colleagues on the call, which is specifically from CCL Europe, and that is, at this point in time, the European Union is asking for input on the EU Green Deal from European and international citizens and organizations. So they are openly accepting input. And believe it or not, one of the questions in the survey right towards the end is about who do you want to connect with diplomatically and what might your reasoning be. So amazingly, that level of detail is in there, though at the outset, it just looks about initial ambition. So we've identified some key things in there, and we think it will take between 20 and 30 minutes to complete this survey. And so if you think you're willing to make that amount of time, if you send me an email at that email address, I will send you some instructions for contributing to that formal European public consultation process. And the reason we're interested in you doing that is we are absolutely at the stage of experimenting with different techniques for communicating with the EU. And we've been told by a couple of significant executive side groups that any form of public consultation is a useful way for us to communicate with them. So if you're up for it, just drop me an email, and then in a few days I will send you some instructions, and that'll be terrific. So thank you for considering that. So thank you all very much for considering the European option, and I think we'll rejoin Ross's group now.